Okay, so this is serial for November 2022. Let's start with two pictures, quite grainy pictures, taken with a Pentax QS1. That's really sub-miniature camera system from Pentax, which is pretty old now. They haven't canceled it yet. It's still on their website, but the latest iteration of their camera was the QS1 in 2014. So yeah, a very beloved system because it's really tiny. Its lenses are of really great quality, but they're also tiny. And here, for example, that's a 15 to 45 millimeter named 06 lens, which is an equivalent for a full frame to 70 to 210 millimeter. Or on the older models, which were the Pentax Qs, not the QS1, equivalent to 85 to 250 millimeter. The 2.8 aperture, linear aperture for this lens is really interesting, combined to the IBIS, to the internal body image stabilization. You can really go low. You can really go low light and still have something usable. And the QS1 went up to 12,800 ISO, which is the case on those two pictures. I found those two pictures interesting, not only because I like the composition, but also it gives you a good idea of that very strange grain from this sensor. It's a 12 megapixel sensor, raw files, but quite organic for a digital sensor. Yeah. That was in Reykjavik. And for that occasion, I took pictures during one of my favorite music festivals in the world, which is Iceland Airwaves. Lots of very different venues, different contemporary styles. Great for the music, of course, and also a little bit for the photography. On the left, that's at the Museum of Modern Art with Bríet. Using the same QS1 with the equivalent of 210 millimeter. Basically, you can really reach out for some interesting pictures, even if you're far away. Nobody really sees you because of the size of the camera system and the lens. So we're not bothering anyone. The quality is really nice. The grain is totally acceptable and actually has got its character. And yeah, as you can see on the right, it's pretty neutral in its rendering, even in monochromatic scenes. And that's on the right, that's Gudrid Hansdóttir at the IDNO concert hall. The next two pictures, still the same camera system, same lens. We can see the grain, and mainly on the right picture, and how the sensor reacts to low exposition, but still a very interesting grain, quite organic, strong, definitely visible. That was Zoe playing at the Kex Hotel. And sometimes when it's too monochromatic, I will go black and white because one of the color channels on the sensor is saturated, like for Gróa at the Gaukurin concert hall on the left. Yeah, a really nice system. The Q system from Pentax is definitely something that would need to be updated. But yeah, in the meantime, we still have the old cameras. A fantastic system, actually. You can really get into a place, nobody sees you, you're quite invisible, and still get really close with this great range of lenses. Here, those two pictures, it gives a good idea of the same singer on the left. That's Zoe, the same than before, but that's on a SL2 camera. So it's this 47 megapixel modern sensor using a 135 millimeter f3.5 vintage Canon lens made for the LTM system, basically. You can see the grain is way different. The character is very different. Same thing on the picture on the right. That's a group from Luxembourg named Tuys, and that's IDNO concert hall. It shows between the pictures we saw before and these, it shows really the difference in character depending on the equipment you use. Here I'm going back with those two pictures to the QS1 system. Sadly, I don't know the name of the group. It was a stoner group, and they were playing at the attic of the Dylan Whiskey Bar in Reykjavik. fantastic concert, by the way. But as you can see, as you can guess, I would say, the picture on the left, I only have a very small aperture to get a shot, and the QS1 lets me do that because it's tiny, not bothering anyone. It's a tiny place too, tiny venue. But still, I get something interesting. The resulting picture is interesting. Same thing on the right. Even though they're very noisy pictures, they really have an organic. The result is really organic. Here are those two next pictures. Going to black and white and using the SL2 with the 135mm f3.5 lens. Again, when the situation is too monochromatic, where one of the channels of the color sensor is really saturated but not the two others, I will switch to black and white in post-production mainly. That's an Irish group, Thumper. And then I will probably do a video about concert photography in the future, but I will really try to find different locations to take the picture I want without interrupting in any way the experience for the public. I like taking pictures also that try to relay the feeling of the public, and so as for the picture on the left, I will merge into the people looking at the concert to try to give a stronger sense of the live venue. And on the right, I'm actually probably on the scene on the left side of the scene to get that shot. Again, the importance of going around when you take pictures of groups in different venues. That was still at the Iceland Airwaves, a really great festival in terms of very different looking venues and ambiances. That's Royksopp, the Swedish duo, doing a DJ set, not their usual group set. So an incredible DJ set. I went black and white because the contrast, because of the strobes, was really strong and often very monochromatic. And often those LED lights are very poor in filling in the color spectrum. So they're good for the live venue, for many things. But for photography, they will be very, very poor. They won't fill in all the different colors of the spectrum and really be red, green, and blue usually, and kind of a weird mix. So yeah, going to black and white often gives something interesting. Here again, SL2 with the Canon 135mm lens. Both of these pictures are at the Hura venue. On the left, the color balance is okay because this is DJ Flugvel of Geimskip who's playing. Her dress is kind of balancing the colors, even so the LED lights around are quite monochromatic, so it actually balances well when I keep the color. On the right, it was really too monochromatic, so I went to black and white, and that was for Berndsen. But really gives us, black and white often gives something, a sense of rock and roll, I believe. Here, going back to the QS1 system, on the left, that's Flott, playing at the Gamlabio, and the color balance is better. So, but again, you can see the grain, this very characteristic grain of the QS1, but pretty decent rendering of the ambiance and what's going on with, again, this great 210 millimeter equivalent lens. And on the right, that's the same equipment with better lighting, an urban scene. The geometry is great, and really, really great piece of equipment. Going to something else, SL2, urban scenes using this 135mm lens. Really soft bokeh, nice and warm, even so the place is really gray, but quite a warm rendering of colors from this vintage lens. That's the streets of Reykjavik. Going back to the Reykjavik airport, a few more scenes from what's going on there. Interesting again. When I test lenses, I try to put them to their paces in very different situations. And here, yeah, let's switch completely to film. That's film photography using Silberra Pan 200 film, black and white, and using a Leica Z2X consumer camera. That's basically a zoom lens. And that was in Heraklion in Crete, in Greece. And trying to do some urbex in the city. It's not really urbex, but I kind of used the flash, tried to put this camera to its paces, and using this film, and also working on diptychs, as you can see with those two next pictures. I find interesting to try to confront two pictures and tell another story than the one you would have if you only had one picture. In that case, I think it works pretty well. That's the port of Heraklion, and also the film is interesting, quite grainy, quite contrasty. The next two pictures, film again. That's Portra 800 from Kodak, a classic, using a Leica M5 camera and vintage lens, the Summarex 85mm f1.5. Quite a legendary lens. I was trying it out a little bit more. So the colors are really nice and warm. Portra tends to increase the the intensity of colors, but here combined to this old lens and this really old school rendering, I find it very, very interesting, very poetic. And again, like on those two next pictures, with those northern lights and the way the sky transform and sunsets appear or sunrises, you get some really very different colors in Iceland at that time of the year. Those two pictures again, the same equipment. Here, let's go to something different. Also, film on the left. That's a Leica C11 APS camera. With APS film, this format that has been expired since quite a while. The film here was a Kodak Advantix from 2000, with an expiry date of 2007, I believe. So that's Icelandic landscapes. It's probably southeast of Iceland. And it dates pretty far back because I usually don't finish my film immediately, and then by the time I develop it. So it's probably... The photos were probably taken in August. And on the right, that's going back to SL2. It was the 135mm f3.5 lens, a view from the Harpa opera in Reykjavik with the moon setting down. A very interesting rendering with this old lens. Very nice bokeh, as you can see on the foreground. Here, again, those two pictures are with the SL2 body. But on the left, that's the 135mm 3.5 in a really dark situation where you can see full scope, the kind of grain you get when you push the ISOs on an SL2. I like the rendering. I like the way the grain, what the grain becomes in those low light situations. Also, I like the image itself. What you see as sort of a ghost image, it's actually not a ghost image. It was actually like this in real, some kind of weird reflection that sort of gave an inverse shadow image. That was during this concert at Hura. And on the right, that's me trying another lens I'm not used to try, an old vintage Soviet lens, a Ter 11. That's a 133mm f2.5 lens. And that's obviously a long exposure with kinetic artifacts, an urban scene. Here again, the Ter 11 lens using the SL2. It's a lens I'm trying to understand. So the first thing I see here is this kind of weird pincushion, slight pincushion, where the vertical lines, the horizontal lines are kind of caved in. And something more interesting is this really strong flare you can get, as you can see on the right image. So it's a mix of a quite soft rendering, very nice warm colors, and this propension to create huge flares. starting to like it. Haven't messed around much. Again, here 2 pictures. That was Pem. It's a photographer from western Switzerland, the French part of Switzerland, Pierre-Edouard. That's in his studio, taking pictures of a friend photographer, which is named Pierre Bise, and a great landscape and concert photographer. And while they were doing those portrait shots, I took a few pictures with this Terry 11 lens. And again, you can see you can really make some really huge flares. But the rendering of this lens is really interesting. It was supposed to be a portrait lens at the time. Yeah, I'm going to test it a little bit more and probably do a video soon about it in more details. Here we're going to medium format. That's with Leica S006 camera using a 120mm macro 2.5 lens. On the left, it's an experimental work I'm doing with multi-exposure and layer mixing. And on the right, that's the raw picture coming out from this camera. And you can see this magenta grain in low light zones. That's really the characteristic of this old CCD sensor, which I like. I really like this, the rendering of this camera. Here, 2 pictures with a completely different equipment. That's the M240, and that's using a 90mm f2.8 Elmarit M lens. It's kind of a classic Leica M-mount lens. It was made in Canada at the time they had their factories there, and it's got quite a soft rendering, but yeah, very warm. I wanted to use it to try using it more. So that's during a hike in the Jura Mountains. Yeah. Next 2 pictures, going back to film using a Leica Mini 3 point-and-shoot camera and Kodacolor 200 film. This Leica Mini 3 has a different kind of lens. It's a 32mm f3.2, which is pretty rare in general. Usually it's more like 35mm that you find on these type of cameras. Actually, on the Mini 2 and Mini 1 cameras, which were the predecessors to the Mini 3, they were a 35mm f3.5. So here it's a Summar lens, following the Leica nomenclature. In contrast to the Elmar lens of the older cameras. Really like the rendering. Yeah, pretty warm colors, both from the sensor and obviously the lens construction. Also, I'm still testing this camera. The left picture, that's the same equipment. Basically, that's autofocus fail. But I like the picture, but I'm not completely convinced by autofocus cameras. I'm testing this one because it's got this weird lens. Actually pretty happy with the results, but don't expect too much in terms of focus precision. And on the right, that's because sometimes it's nice also. I'm a big fan of using Leica cameras for many reasons. When I test vintage lenses, the SL2 has this weird micro prism on front of the sensor, which makes it theoretically better for old vintage lenses to focus their light rays. But that's a Nikon DF digital camera body with an 85mm f1.4 Nikkor, which I decided to use a little bit to see if that really transforms the way I see the world around me. And yeah, interesting rendering, definitely different. I find it more crisp and digital than what I'm used to. But that was the last picture of this series. Hopefully you were entertained and interested, I guess. If you have questions or comments, don't hesitate, and see you next time.